I know that the new wave of unions has been really inspiring to many, many people. I'm sure Emily will touch on that when she talks as well. But I also think that it's a perfect kind of introduction to the work that Dorothy's been doing. I know from speaking to Dorothy, you know, the ethics of cooperation and working together for economic democracy and ownership are really key to your work, Dorothy. So I'm going to hand over to you now.
Thank you very much. Excuse me one moment. I'm going to start my stopwatch to keep me on time. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to speak. As you've been told, I'm Dorothy Francis, and I work for an organisation called CLES, which stands for Cooperative and Social Enterprise Agency. We are based in Leicestershire, but cover the whole of the East Midlands as required. And we promote social business. We help people to establish and grow community-owned social businesses, including cooperatives, social enterprise, community business, and credit unions. And we are ourselves a cooperative in that we felt we ought to practice what we preach. And so we have been a cooperative pretty much since the start of our existence back in 1982. Our strapline is change the way you work. And this reflects the aspirations of so many people and communities who approach us, as you will see. I'm here today because one of the conference organisers interviewed me a few weeks ago and then returned to ask me to speak at today's conference. I was a little bit hesitant and I said, what should I talk about? And the answer was, tell the story that you told me. I think it illustrates municipalism. So that's what I'm going to do. It's a personal story rooted in my own experience, but I hope that you will bear with me and will appreciate why I was encouraged to share it. The story starts more than 40 years ago. It's 1979 and I'm 18. I'm working as a telephonist for the General Post Office, which was the telecommunications arm of the then nationalised Royal Mail. It was a good job. This is the 1970s. I'm a black girl from a council estate and a comprehensive school. My father was a car worker, my mother a cleaner. They were impressed that I had a white collar job, that I went to work in skirts and blouses and high heels rather than overalls and boiler suits like them. I had a job for life. The GPO was very paternalistic. Eileen, who trained me, started there at 15 and retired at 60. It was that type of institution. Good pay, lots of perks. I'd landed on my feet, hadn't I? However, I wasn't happy. Something was not right. I just felt there had to be a different way to work. It wasn't a horrible job, but I just knew it wasn't the way I wanted to work for the rest of my life. I wasn't steeped in politics or community activism, but I knew I needed something else. I didn't have the language, but I knew what I wanted. I wanted to feel involved, useful, productive, valued. I wanted to know that I was contributing. That I was not just a small cog in a large machine. I wanted my needs to be serviced by work rather than me serving work. I wanted political democracy. I wanted my employment to recognise me as an individual, not just as a unit of production. Also, I wanted to play a part in changing the world. That might seem a little highfalutin, maybe, but it's what I wanted. And I knew that I could not simply work, just work for 40 plus years. I wanted to make a change. I wanted to do something I was passionate about. I was very frustrated. I talked to a few people, but they either laughed at me or they didn't understand what I meant when I said, surely there must be another way to work. This was the era of factories, industry, offices. People simply worked and then they retired. It was as simple as that. So why was I asking questions of the system? I was actually deemed odd enough by my peers already. I read a lot of books. That was enough to make you seem odd. So I learned to stay quiet. I was 18 when I started at the post office and left in 1980 when I was 19. To the absolute fury of my manager, who was aghast that I was walking away from a job for life in exchange for 3 years on a student grant and an unknown future. She said I was ungrateful. However, I left. And the thoughts simmered in my head for the next few years. I went to university. I came out the other side after 3 years. I was still seeking a different way to work. I was accepted by the University of Warwick to study an MA and trained to be a community social worker. Maybe that was the way to change the world. And then, out of the blue, I was approached by some friends who were setting up a bookshop, but not just any bookshop. They wanted to set up as a cooperative. And they asked me whether I'd join, and I said, yes, I'll do that until September comes around and I start at uni. But I said, what's a cooperative? And they explained it to me. And it was like a light went on in my head. I never took up the place at university, and I never did become a social worker, because the values and principles of cooperation instantly resonated with me. The idea of democracy, of one person, one member, one vote, of equality, of having equal rights and benefits, of being treated justly and fairly because of the principle of equity, of solidarity, of members supporting each other and other cooperatives and community. Those all resonated with me. Also, what resonated was all of this is built on ethical values of honesty, openness, social responsibility, and caring for others. It was about people, not just economics. I was 22 years of age, and I'd been looking for this way of working for at least 4 years. I didn't have a name for it. I considered that I was lucky to stumble on it at just 22, because it changed the course of my life. I've worked within the cooperative and social business sector ever since. But why did I have to find out by accident? Why was this not taught at school? I was taught capitalism and how the state expected me to be a good and compliant worker, but never taught about ownership, democratic workplaces, or controlling my own work and life. Workplace organising is important, as the previous speaker has just so eloquently said. It's important how we work, because workplace organising can be a model for how people organise otherwise in the world, in their communities, social life, even in their religion. I knew that if I controlled my work, I would better control my life. Work is so important. In the old days, and by the old days, I mean pre-March the 23rd, 2020, before we went into lockdown, when we actually went out to work, we spent more weekday waking hours with colleagues than with loved ones. So I've always felt that it was essential that work is satisfying and has meaning. But how many people can truly say that about their work? At 22 years of age, I knew I couldn't wait for the state to transform my existence and give me control of my life. This was 1983, and it was only in 1976, just a few years earlier, that the state had passed legislation that made it illegal to deny me employment, housing, or services because of my colour. In 1975, I went for a Saturday job in a chippy, and the owner told me that he couldn't afford to employ me because his customers would not take chips from a darkie. No offence, love. Already at 14, this was my experience of work, and I knew that I could not endure that for a further 50 years. I was lucky to stumble onto cooperatives, as I wouldn't have otherwise found the workplace democracy and control that I was looking for. But what was the attraction, and how does this relate to municipalism? For me, it was about sharing and creating power. It was about giving incentive to collaborate. It was about promoting discourse and dissent without confrontation. It allowed me to ask why. I always wanted to know, still always want to know why. I think in questioning why, we come to how, and then what can we do to change this? Co-ops for me were about creating ownership and control. This is very important to me because as a Black woman, in fact, I'd say it's essential. As women, working class people, and people of colour, we are denied control. It's not given to us. And I needed a form of work which allowed me control over my life. And in co-ops, I found a way which was open, horizontal, without hierarchy, and promoted face-to-face interaction instead of faceless communication, which came down from on high. It allowed teams to make fairly instant decisions rather than having to take requests up to 3 or 4 levels of command. It was honest and accountable. Those ethics were inbuilt. And I realized that cooperatives is where we could build resilience through working together, through sharing goals and values, having the same principles. And I knew that what we were doing was building wealth and strength in communities. I'm not sure that I had all these words in my head at the time. I'd have been an odd 22-year-old who went around talking of community municipalism and shared wealth. However, a form of those words is what drove me to seek change and was what made me walk away from a good job in my teens. What I like about my job at CASE is the opportunity to turn rhetoric into action, to apply values and ethics to enterprise. I sometimes worry that we're caught up in discourse and wonder how we can put it into practice. How do we make this mean something to people? I remember one of my friends saying to me, well, that's a lot of big posh words, Dorothy, but how do you make them work? And in planning this presentation, I was encouraged to illustrate with some people who, by their own admission, are not posh at all, but who I feel are an example of municipalism in action. So let me relocate you now. You're in Shepshed, a small town near Loughborough. It's 1993, and I've just met two women, Pauline Grays and Sarah Sanders. They're good friends, and they've both been made redundant for the third time each, and they're a bit fed up. And they've decided that they never want to line up again at a notice board to see their name down as someone who's unwanted and surplus to requirements. They have a vague thought about setting up in business. They choose domiciliary care, looking after elderly, infirm and ill people in their own homes instead of in hospitals. This was quite a new thing at the time. And as the first speaker talked about, we need to talk sometimes about the things that do not work. And one of the things that was not working was the social services model of looking after elderly or infirm people who needed care. It was moribund, it needed change. And Pauline and Sarah felt they could do that. And in doing it, they wanted all workers to be equal and have democratic control over what they did. That was immovable in terms of what they demanded. So they knew what they wanted, but not how to do it. They came to an event I spoke at and came up to me afterwards and requested a meeting. They said, we're not business people. I said, what do business people look like? They said, white, middle class, middle-aged men in grey suits with a degree. Not two women who speak in a Leicestershire accent and litter their sentences with your beauty and hey up me duck. If you're outside of the East Midlands, that's a very common saying. They said, we're two thick working class women from Shepshed. We have no qualifications. And then Sarah corrected herself and said, actually, we both have a certificate that shows we can swim the length of the baths. I said, I'm not quite sure how we can apply that to your business, but let's see. They wanted to own and control their own work, and I helped them to set up their enterprise to do that. They thought if they could employ eight people, they'd be doing well. A business of 10 would have done them fine. They struggled for the first 2 years, but grew steadily, 20, 50, 70 members. By year 5, they employed 150 people. They were the single biggest employer in Shepshed. They also covered Loughborough, Colville and Meashaw. Fast forward to year 10, and we're at the UK Social Enterprise Awards in County Hall in London. Huge event, glitzy, lots of razzmatazz. Pauline, Sarah and I went down. Everybody back in Leicestershire, fingers crossed, bated breaths, waiting for the phone call. They stood a good chance. We were really excited. And then the envelope was opened and a name was read out, and it wasn't Shepshed Carers. They hadn't won. And I was so disappointed. I'll try not to cry in telling this story because I've told it a number of times, but I always well up. So I've got a tissue here just in case, because I don't think, oops, just dropped it. I don't think that tears and a runny nose is a good look on camera. So I was crushingly disappointed for them. And I said, I'm sorry you didn't win. I'm really sorry. But Sarah sat back quite satisfied and she said, it's okay, we have won. I said, how? You're not the person up on the stage clutching the trophy and having your picture taken with a B-list celeb. And she says, Dorothy, we are already winners and have been for years. We became winners the day you believed in us. But she said, we're not the only winners. It's not just us as founder members who have won by creating our own employment, but all the member workers of Shepshed Carers who have good employment. And the people we care for have won by having better care, and their families and loved ones have won. And local employers who retain skills because employees don't need to give up their jobs to look after their loved ones, well, they've won too, Dorothy. And the local economy is a winner because we're local people and we spend our money on the local high street. And overall, we're winners because of what we've done for the reputation of care work. And we are all winners because you believed in us and gave us the opportunity to be winners. You showed us how we could have ownership of our work and lives, how we could build resilience as a community, how we could develop economic and community control. You made us into community-focused people who have had a huge economic impact on our community. You showed us how to defy authority to create community power and how to build community inclusion, representation and participation. And Sarah said, you aided and abetted two thick working class women from Shropshire to change the world, albeit a small part of Leicestershire, but still the world. So she said, we have won. We are the true winners tonight, not the people on stage clutching the trophy. And you can perhaps understand why even now, telling this story once more after so many years, I'm still fighting back tears because it always makes me cry. I find it almost impossible to tell that story without welling up. And I believe that that is a clear description of municipalism. Pauline and Sarah wouldn't have called it municipalism. To them, it was about a structure that worked. It was about ethics, values, principles, community control and empowerment. It was what was right. It was the only way to do it. You could say that the only way was ethics. Sorry, terrible joke. I thought I ought to lighten the mood. And the postscript to this story, Shropshire Carers returned to London the next year and they walked away with the trophy as Social Enterprise of the Year. So they were truly all-round winners. And my hope is that we can, through municipalism, help all communities to become winners. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Dorothy. Such a round of applause going on there. Such a fantastic set of stories and such rich content that really helps us take us through, I suppose, really from how we can start in our communities to build wider community power and economic democracy. And you know, there was so much in there, but just 2 points that really jumped out to me. One is sort of what motivates us as human beings. People talk about the idea of self-love and social love. Yes, we want a meaningful job that creates us, you know, some income and meets our needs, but also we would need to have, as human beings, wider sense of purpose, to be valued in our communities and to be recognised for that. And also there's another sort of key municipalist idea in there, the sort of politics of proximity, I suppose. I mean, one of the sort of, I suppose, the critiques of our democracy is that, you know, our interaction with it is, to many people, just a sort of intermittent vote now and again. And I suppose if you're able to increase and grow democracy, actually, how does that happen in a much more everyday way? How are we able to influence the community and the businesses around us? And that's really important, and a really important part of municipalism.